Welcome back to the Be Ruthless Show. I'm your host, Sam Ruth. Joining me today is Kate Mollison. We have Jim and Craig with us. They were messing with our Wi-Fi. Kate is a certified grief coach who uses a unique approach to educate individuals and businesses around the importance of grief. Using her own experience with grief, Kate adds a personal touch to an otherwise isolating and difficult topic, as she has an understanding of the nuanced experiences grief creates. She's the founder and operator of On Tuesdays We Wear Black, a grief resource agency where she's a grief and bereavement specialist working with individuals experiencing grief. She focuses on helping people organize all the financial and legal components that happen after a death occurs so that grief can happen in the healthiest way possible. Kate has several years' experience as a clinical case manager and as a certified playmaker. She uses a modality that helps people unlock joy and find peace and meaning again after loss by educating clients about grief and creating self-awareness to foster visibility and support. She deals with all types of loss and can support anyone, anywhere via Zoom, text, or call. I joked that Jim and Craig are with us because anytime I have Wi-Fi problems, I really do believe it's Jim. And the fact that you said Craig does that too kind of blows my mind.
It's an absolute synchronicity. And Craig was an IT guy and a huge computer nerd. And I always joked, I'm hardware, he's software. I can install a garbage disposal with my eyes closed, but the router, I was like, ugh, and I would hand him the thing and my phone would do stuff and I'd be like, fix it, the thing. So Craig, thank you so much.
I didn't know that, but we have just recently connected through a beautiful soul who is in both of our worlds, named Sean, who makes journals and is wonderful. And I'm so grateful that she has brought us together. And thank you for being here. We are still having a little bit of a connection issue. So I apologize. We might have to reconnect here. But tell everyone a little bit about why we wear black on Tuesdays.
So I always, you have to have a little bit of a dark sense of humor. Like, tell me if anything is off limits. I'd say if he weren't cremated, he would be rolling in his grave. But right now it's kind of like a rock tumbler. Yeah, Craig was a huge Broadway musical fan, big fan and supporter of the arts in general. And I always enjoyed that, given he was such an analytical mind and a tech mind, that he had such a passion and appreciation for musicals. And closeted, if anybody else asked him, he would deny it. His favorite one was Mean Girls. So the iconic line from Mean Girls is, on Wednesdays, we wear pink. Well, Craig passed away on a Tuesday. So I just felt it was very apropos to honor him in that way. And I wear black on Tuesdays. So it's a mission that I take to share that anecdote about him, that piece of his personality that gets to live on through the name in my business. It was hard coming up with a name. And then, it kind of came to me and I was like, oh, I get to tell his story. I get to preach the gospel of Craig every time someone goes, how did you get that name? Or, oh my gosh. And who doesn't love to talk about Mean Girls? They're back with a new movie, I think. It's like the musical version, but made in film. I'm like, oh, all that's old is new again.
I was writing our show notes. I usually don't do it until after an episode, but it's weird to say that I was excited after we talked. Like, when you meet another widow, I always am instantly connected. We share a bond that other people don't understand, but you share a fire that I have. Mm-hmm. We had a conversation, but you get things in a way, and you have a fire like I have in a way. So I really did hang up, like, excited. I hate that we're bonded by loss, but you have this same drive, passion to do something about what's wrong with so many things in the grief culture. And so it's weird to use the word excited connected to that.
Yeah.
But I did hang up with, like, she gets it in a way I have not found with another widow. right? Like,
yeah, no, we hung up and I called like 6 different people. Like I called a couple, network connections, and I called my best friend, and and I was like, oh my God, like you don't understand. And like one of them pointed out to me that it would be very easy. And I think Sean even mentioned this, that it would be so easy for you and I to see each other as competitors, because what we do is so similar and so aligned and so driven and so, grief and widow and support centric. But the fact that we've experienced this loss and have this real deep connection that you can't make any other way other than through experience, it makes us bonded and unites us in the fight to change the narrative around death, dying, grief, and all things that suck. We didn't get to choose this. And I often tell my clients or the businesses I work with, grief is a language, and you become fluent in it at the announcement of time of death. The minute they say time of death, you now speak this language. And it's like being a toddler all over again. You have to relearn your relationship with food and the way you navigate the world and the way you walk and the way you carry yourself and the way you people, the way you interact with other humans. And it's not always received well. And then there's guilt and internal reflection. So to have someone mirror back to me that same like ferocity, that same tenacity and alchemy, we take what we were given and we add lemons and maybe some vodka and turn it into lemonade. We have to salt the steak a little bit and put it back out into the world, because you have to leave it better than you found it.
It's interesting that I never crossed my mind. Competition. I bring so many people into my world with skills that I don't have, or with resources that they can give my clients that will help them heal. There are people who maybe see others as a threat or competition. My brain isn't wired that way. And those that are, I feel like that's why maybe we're not getting anywhere, because if we don't work together, we're not going to get heard.
Right. Yeah, but it was so interesting for me, for all the business professionals to, like the real estate agents and the, insurance agents and the mortgage brokers and the small business owners were all like, how are you working with them? How's that helping you? And I'm like, because it's an amplification of my message and my voice, and, together we're stronger, and united we stand kind of thing. And I hate to use those platitudes and colloquialisms, but it really is true. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but what we don't realize until we go through it is that it takes an even bigger village to support a griever. And being a parent can be a choice. Becoming a griever is inevitable, whether it's a pet or a sibling or a parent or, God forbid, a child or a spouse or a significant other or a friend. I even joke, I hate to be cavalier about it, but we've all experienced grief, right? Your parents sold your childhood home, your first pet had to be put down, you put a hole in your favorite sweater. It doesn't matter if that's your only experience with grief. It's still grief and it's still valid. And we tend to just dismiss it. And it blows my mind, especially post-COVID, where we as a nation, we as a community, we as a global world have experienced such an incredible loss and change and experience with grief. And even 3-4 years out from COVID, we're still turning a blind eye to it because that's easier. And I think you and I doing the work to change that dialogue, to bring it out of the shadows, to like put our foot down and say, no, damn it, let's talk about this, because you're going to experience it. And I've been there, and, I feel like a drill sergeant in boot camp. I'm like, okay, troops, let's go.
But I don't think we tend to dismiss it. I think we're taught to dismiss it. I believe we are like, I played sports. We are taught to shake it off and get back out there. But we're also taught that with feelings.
You leave your stuff at the door. And I worked retail for a really long time. And all the times I was told to coach my staff, you check your personal stuff at the door, you come to work, you put on your retail voice and you perform. and that's how I'm going to hold you accountable. But if you don't know what someone's going through, and then given the legality of like bereavement leave and those kinds of things, like I could do a whole 6-hour talk on bereavement leave. Don't even get me started. That's a pain point for me. I digress. But, we come into those retail environments, and that barista who doesn't have a smile and isn't giving you good customer service, like for all you know, like their mom died yesterday and they had to come to work because they don't have the leave, or their, grandfather who was a caretaker died a year ago and it's the anniversary of the death, and your sweater reminded them and triggered them. And I'm not saying people have to walk on eggshells, because that's the other thing I hate, is being treated like I'm porcelain and like I'm fragile. It's like, it's not about being delicate. It's about being understood and finding ways to translate this language that we now speak to the non-speakers, to give them the tools to, communicate with us.
One of the talks in the event that I had, that we were talking about the fact that no one knows there's a National Grief Awareness Week, the fact that no one talks about these days that could be used to help people struggling. I have a friend who's a teacher, and before she even gets to academics, they throw out the trash, and that's like that is not garbage. That is emotional garbage. Then they sit and turn and talk about what that just was, in case any of that needed to be, I had a fight with mom before I got here and I'm still feeling it. Then they do some sort of meditation or some sort of skill that we were never taught in school. And then when all of that is done, they get to academics. And that's how I want the world to be everywhere.
Yeah. And I think about like all the skills we're giving the future generations. Like I have a 14-year-old, and he now, per Connecticut law, has to pass a financial planning class in order to get his high school diploma, which I love, because I was like, he's going to know how to balance a checkbook, write a check, use a debit card, file taxes, like all of those things that we're not initially taught, and we turn 18 and we're thrown to the wolves. Why isn't some of that emotional toolbox in there? And he has an IEP, so some of that is ingrained in his, pull out and push in services, as I'm sure you're aware, given your background. But for the kids who aren't special needs, or for the people who aren't experiencing like, visible trauma or disability, we're left to our own devices to process these things. And one of the things I touched on in a holiday workshop I did on Monday was about how grief manifests in the physical body. How you can have, because of the, increased cortisone hormone, you get fluid retention in your joints, and you can get deterioration of cartilage, and you can have a compressed spine and migraines and insomnia and, malnutrition because you're not eating or overeating. And then you're exacerbating potential underlying issues, and it becomes self-fulfilling and cyclical. And you're basically attacking yourself and going, what the hell's wrong with me? And the root of the problem is unresolved grief or trauma, and we don't prepare people to be better humans. And it would make life more enjoyable for all of us and a nicer place to live in if we all just understood that and took a step back and went, whoa, this chronic pain that I have, this, I was diagnosed with MS or whatever, these people who have these problems, like, is there a correlation to loss? The answer is yes.
You don't want to get started on your pain point. I have too many, but if you let's take that argument to addiction, homelessness, right? Grief, I believe, is connected to many of these things. And if we addressed it in any way, shape, or form, anywhere, right? My 10-year-old niece, soon to be 11, has a therapy dog at her school. She gets to say, all she has to say is, can I go see the therapy dog? Can I have time with it? Now, there are students scheduled who need the dog, and they have blocks of time, but anyone is allowed to and they don't have to explain why.
Yeah, because you shouldn't have to give people the narrative every time you need support. There's another thing, so we talked about self-care and how important it is to manage grief. And a lot of people think of self-care as like getting a manicure or squeezing in an extra round of golf or ordering the dessert you don't normally get to. And yes, while those can be self-care, from a grief perspective, it's so much bigger than that. It's holding boundaries, saying, thank you for the invitation, but I'm not going to make it. Like having an exit strategy. You get somewhere and you get triggered and being like, I need to go, and not having to explain yourself like, oh, why? You seem fine. Like, and if you have to tell people like, oh, I have another engagement, like, fine, do you, but protect yourself. Self-care is treating yourself like you're taking care of an ill friend. And that's also something we're not taught. And then in correlation to grief, you don't have the bandwidth or the neurological capacity. Like your brain waves are actually shorter. There's studies and science that proves like the chemical, saturation in your brain changes the fat tissue in your brain, and how you receive, retain, process, and regurgitate information is permanently altered. It is brain damage in its own way. And we're expected to just function normally after 5 days bereavement leave, but we can't. And so I think about kids and all of like the school shootings and stuff. Like here in Connecticut, we just had the 11th anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting, where 6 children and 2 educators lost their lives due to a gunman. And those families are still experiencing that grief and that thing and that adventure with this new versions of themselves. Had there been therapy dogs or access to resources, maybe their journey would be a little bit easier or better. Not over, because grief never goes away, but maybe healthier. And we wouldn't run into the increased risk of child delinquency when they've experienced loss, or increased drug and addiction use, or, those other maladaptive behaviors that we turn to because we don't have a better toolbox.
And if you're listening or watching and you're in a position at a company or at a school where you can create something or bring someone in, we are now in a world where people are experiencing multiple of these traumas. We have people who have lost loved ones during COVID, and now they have lived through multiple shootings. And even if they haven't, we're going through drills. They go to school now and are required to learn these safety drills. I don't know about you. I have anxiety. That could be traumatic and triggering right there.
Yep.
Right. We have to address the fact that these things are invisible. And so I said it 100 times during my 8-day event: emotional tummy aches, emotional crutches, emotional something. Everything connected to grief is invisible. And we're talking right now about the language. For you and I, we're very vocal, we're very fierce, we're very bold. It's not that easy. It's not that easy to say, help, I'm not okay, today is difficult, for people with these invisible things. And the world has this misunderstanding that after X amount of time, we're fine. We're walking around functioning and working because we have to. And these things that we're struggling with are invisible. So if you are in a position at a school or at a business where you can do something to create anything, bringing in a therapy dog, bringing in one of us who does trainings to support your staff in these situations, just recognize that someone right now is sitting at a desk, absolutely panicking about not losing their job because they cannot perform what they did last week the same way.
And they're held accountable to the same performance review standards. Yes. Further than that, if you are in a position where you know someone who's been through it, check in with yourself. What language are you using? Call me if you need something. We don't have the physical capacity to pick up the phone. It takes every ounce of fiber in our being. Me, in my position, still, if I have to make an appointment somewhere and I can't schedule it online, I'm looking for a different provider, because I struggle to pick up the phone, to talk on the phone. Because the last time I talked on the phone with a medical professional was when I got the phone call. I physically can't. It's debilitating for me. So as a healthcare professional, if you have a website, making online booking, making it ADA accessible, in those types of ways. And if you're someone who knows someone grieving, do something to support them. It's you don't have to know exactly what to say, but you just have to be able to hold the space and be really comfortable with being uncomfortable. because we are uncomfortable every day. Maybe not all day, sometimes all day, but it's minute by minute. And just turn to your friend circle and check in, send them a text, be like, hey, thinking of you. You know, like, can I bring you over a cup of coffee? Like, I'm going to the store, send me your grocery list. I'll pick you up a few things. Like, not that, do you need anything? Or call me if you need something, or I'll be there. Because we so many times find out that the people who say that when we call them, they're not there. So don't just say it, do it. It will be far more well received and impactful in your circle of people.
I had so many people probably, a couple of years after losing Jim, say, I wanted to reach out, but I didn't know what to say. And we understand that you are uncomfortable, but say anything, send a heart, I went through this with my dad. We had a family friend, and I said the same thing, send thinking of you, send anything. And he said, I'm doing that, but they're not replying. And I said, that's okay. They don't have to. They're receiving, and they know when they're ready. The people who are continuing to send, whether or not you're responding. I reached a point, it was a couple of years where I was ready to pick up the phone and able, and I did a bunch of thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for continuing to reach out when I was not able to respond. We're not able to. We are really not able to. There's something, for me, it was, if I'm not crying hysterically and I'm somewhat able to function right now, picking up this call is going to make me hysterically cry. And I have a few more things I need to get through right now. So
Yep.
I love you and thank you for calling, but I don't want to ruin the rest of my day yet.
Or we end up mitigating other people's grief. And I get it. They are experiencing grief in their own right. They're grieving the former versions of us that we can no longer be. They want us so badly to get back to normal. And there is no getting back to normal. We can't ever go back. We are now in a different type of existence. But they don't reach out, or they don't say the right things, or they don't say anything at all, because they're grieving us, and they don't know how to handle us. And then we end up managing their grief. I experienced that with several relatives, and it was like they were re-griefing, and I was having to let them take over the narrative, and then let them be upset. And then there was guilt because they kind of made it feel like I wasn't upset enough for them, and I became a show pony. And it was like, oh, you're not crying when I tell you that story or show you that picture? And it's like, not today, maybe tomorrow, who knows? But having to manage other people's grief symptoms when they're feeling pity for you is a whole other untalked about component of grief, because then our grief is pushed aside and we take even longer to resolve our feelings because we're unsupported and we're managing other people's symptoms.
You mentioned not being the same. People were inviting me to the things I had always done, which makes sense. This is how I had lived my life, and these were the things they were used to doing with me. However, I could not do them, right? Like, I didn't want to be around crowds of people cheering at a football game. I was miserable. Happy people made no sense to me. So offering an alternative or asking me if there was something different, the people who understood that I wanted to be with I have 2 dogs now, but be with my one dog anywhere. I didn't want to leave her. She was grieving too.
Yeah. And pets grieve, and we don't even think about that. Like, I have a dog too, and her personality is so different after Craig's death, because that was his dog. Like, I was second fiddle to the dog, but her personality is different. And so we're managing the pet, and they don't understand, and they don't have the language or the capacity to communicate that. And then we just think it's an obedience thing, and we punish them. And that's a whole other, or children, like nonverbal children. My daughter was 19 months old. There was a whole regression and outburst. And if people don't understand grief for what it is and how it manifests, it just becomes an obedience thing. And then we're perpetuating trauma through grief. The dog is such an integral part to my children's healing process. And I love the idea of people giving that alternative and including it. I'm not sure about where you are, but here on the East Coast, there's so many coffee shops and restaurants that are pet friendly, that have outdoor patio spaces. And even in the winter, they have heated spaces. There's bed and breakfasts and inns and that are also super pet friendly. It's an easy say to go, hey, let's meet for coffee. Let's meet here, because then you can bring the dog. I would love to see the dog and bring a treat for the dog and love on the dog. Or offering an exit strategy, like I talked about before, like, hey, I know you normally do this party and I would love for you to come if that feels okay. If not, let's do something else, or you don't have to stay, or just giving that permission to decline or leave or hold your own boundaries is so critical as a support person.
I say give multiple choice questions, not essay open-ended, right? Like, so
but like a toddler too, minimal choices, more than 3. And I'm so overwhelmed and like paralyzed with decision making because I had to make so many big decisions by myself all at once. It's like, no, I can't handle that. Do you want Chinese food or do you want Italian food? Exactly. That I can pick from. But if you go, what do you want to eat? I probably won't eat because I don't know and I can't have the brain power to make that choice. Grief it affects you systemically, like literally on a cellular level. Your chromosomes deteriorate. You're susceptible to, bone marrow disease and a decreased immune system and neurological conditions. Like my ADHD diagnosis came after my experience with grief because it brought those things to the surface. It exacerbates physical conditions, like I talked about. It creates, insomnia and eating changes and personality changes. You can have hair loss and develop skin lesions and all of these things. It changes you that way, but it changes you socially, your capacity to interact with people and how you communicate. For some people who aren't as emboldened as we are, maybe they become emboldened, but it could also go the other way. For those outspoken, loud people, they then become, introverted and retreat inward because that's the only place that feels safe and like they have control. And then society kind of forces us to mask, similar to ADHD masking or autism masking, where people learn to put their symptoms and their, conditions in their back pocket to function normally in order to be received well. We mask with grief. We pretend it's okay, or sometimes we pretend it's not okay to function in society.
The world wants us to. I chose not to. I was not willing to. It's not healthy. I couldn't, I wouldn't. And so that was my journey. And I became passionate about letting others know you don't have to, right? Like, we don't have to do that. The world wants us to. The world has it backwards. We don't have to do it their way. So to anyone watching or listening, that's where I say exit strategy. Or who do you have with you to speak up or give an elbow and say, like, it's, for me, masking is not an option. It just isn't good for me. For someone else, it might be better. It might be better to mask than to have that conversation.
Might be safer.
Right. But
I think about
you and I are working to get this world to change so that people don't have to, because it shouldn't be up to us. Like, we, as the person, all we did was lose someone.
Did I lose you? Did I lose you? Oh. I'm not sure if I'm still live. or if she's live. Okay. That's good to know. Thank you for letting me know that someone can still see and hear me, and I appreciate you for watching. Um, I think she's having problems with her Wi-Fi, but she makes a good point where she's talking about how we have to mask, and I also made the choice to not mask. Um, it's how I live authentically. I used to mask, and it became unsustainable for me. So for anyone out there listening, watching, just know that, like she said, that you don't have to mask unless it's a safety issue. One of a client that I work with was in a domestic violence situation, and for her, it's a literal safety issue. So just masking was how she lived and survived and sustained. Um, and I'm hoping that Samantha can come back on. I'm just going to send her a real quick message. Bear with me. But I'm glad to know that people are watching and that this is coming through. And for any of the people who are connected to me, if you have questions for me while we're waiting, please feel free to send them through. I'd love to touch base with you on the grief experience, and just know that I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here and speak on this subject. Can't multitask. That's also a side effect of grief. Oh, I think she's back. There she is.
Oh, I'm trying. My God.
That's okay. The good news is I was still live, and people were telling me that they could still hear me, and then I was continuing the dialogue around the safety of masking if necessary. Like, I have a client who's in a DV situation, and so for her, masking was necessary.
Okay. Well, thank you for
and then
keeping going.
of course, inviting people to, either ask me questions, which no one did, but I appreciate the people who were like, hey, I can still see you. And I was like, cool, let's keep talking. So welcome back.
Here I am, Jim and Craig. Thank you for the entertainment.
It goes back to that tenacity and that vigilance and that agility that we learn as grievers, because our whole world is upside down. And it's like handing a toddler a driver's license and expecting them to go operate a vehicle successfully. It's unrealistic, because we are, like I said previously, relearning that way of living, of how to exist. And we have to get really good at just being agile and going with the flow and being like, well, that's what it is today. And here you go, everybody. Like, the number of times I've sat on the floor in the grocery store and cried, I've lost count, because his favorite frozen Italian ice was on sale. And I literally would just like come around the corner and the big thing would be there, and like rainy face in public. And then, people go, well, at least you cry pretty. Really? Okay. Thanks so much. Dead husband looks good on me.
People say, one of my friends says, if I ever wrote a book, it would be called Stupid That People Say. And I'm like, please write it. But I think I'm impressed that you say toddler. I tell my clients that I felt like an infant, and I hope they're not offended, but that I literally told people, please treat me like an infant. I'm relearning everything, and I don't, and even if I relearned it yesterday, I might be relearning it again tomorrow.
Because my short-term memory sucks. And I say that to people all the time. I'm like, I'm going to put it in my calendar and I'm going to put 10,000 alarms and reminders, but there's a high likelihood that I will either forget, be late, or not show up. So please kindly follow up with me. Hate to put that on you, but it's my life now, and it sucks. Like, I hate looking at my calendar and seeing 37,000 things, and they're not all actual appointments. Like today it was like, refill my son's prescription, and like, go to the doctor because I had a doctor's appointment, and like, remember to buy toilet paper, and then all of my other appointments in between. So people who look at my calendar, they're like, wow, you're busy. You've got lots of time blocked out. I'm like, nope, my short-term memory sucks.
But acknowledge, like, at first, I thought I was going crazy. I'm intelligent.
To think that.
Freeze. What is happening to me? Connecting with other people who have been through it and having them tell me this is what happens. That's comforting. Like, I had to be told, you are not losing your mind. This is grief. Even though I'm trained in it and this is my career, when it happens to you, it feels like you're losing your mind. Then accepting it and learning and developing the tools and having the sticky notes and asking people, remind me in case I forget. Then it's okay, this is how I learned to live and function this way. But again, it's invisible. Other people, oh, Sam went to Michigan. She's got this. They don't see the sticky notes. They
Yep,
don't
wait.
they don't
Yep.
right, that grief is invisible. They just see Sam's gotten through it.
Because we have to.
Correct.
Because there is, and people are like, oh, it is a choice. I'm like, the alternative is like curling up in a ball and dying. I often say if I didn't have children, I would be probably a raging alcoholic, homeless under a bridge in Hartford, because I wouldn't have a reason to continue functioning.
But there are people who resist and struggle with acknowledging that our brain changes and acknowledging, you say you're a toddler. I said I was an infant. Maybe I'm a toddler now, right? Maybe I've grown up and I've become but I think the people who fight the fact and believe that they can get back to a certain place, our brain does not. It's permanent, right? So if people will accept that grief changes their brain, then that part of the struggle becomes a little bit less, because I am
Totally.
not, my brain changed. I have stickies everywhere. I now have learned to navigate that part of the journey.
Yeah. And I think I was like, I had a period where, I started as the toddler and I regressed to the infant. And then I kind of came back to the toddler because I use toddler because I have those, temper tantrums or outbursts or those moments of just like emotional dysregulation that I can't explain and I can't articulate and I can't control. And that's kind of where the toddler philosophy came for me. But it was so much harder to relearn those things. I'm a type A and I can't wrap my head around a vague or a theory or, it has to be tangible. So once I did the research and I accepted and learned the actual science behind grief, then I was able to accept it. And so some of the stuff that I practice is empowering people with that tangible knowledge, because it's more than just someone telling you, you're not crazy. It's okay. This is normal. It's like, no, the CDC reports that 50% of all widows are under the age of 60. The CDC also reports that statistically speaking, 27% of widows become addicted to drugs and alcohol in the first 5 years. And that is to a level of AA supports or inpatients. Of that percent, 12% attempt suicide in the first year. That's enough women to fill Manhattan twice every year, per the CDC. I'm not making this stuff up. And I always like to cite those sources. Princeton did a study about the deterioration of the chromosomal telomeres. Once your telomeres start to fray, that opens you up to literal sickle cell anemia, bone marrow disease, brain cancers, physical conditions that are related to the actual cellular degeneration that happens as a result of grief and trauma. Once I was able to understand that the things that are happening to me, the things I'm experiencing, aren't just in my head and aren't just people giving me platitudes, I was able to make the choice to stand up and be open to moving forward. And everyone...
So those statistics, when I start and when I do a talk, people's jaws within 30 seconds
hit the floor.
It's like, what? But the world goes around and around ignoring grief. But within 30 seconds, all we have to do is tell them something like that. And that's...
Well, you blew my mind with the ADA thing. I had no idea that grief was covered under ADA. And so immediately when I went to my holiday workshop that next night, I was like, hey guys, listen, good to know. And I shared it with them because it's important. It's an access point for us to get support and be understood and be protected. It's a disenfranchisement to experience grief.
Right? What if we pulled up you just picked one person,
and it's a sliver of the puzzle. Yep.
We could pick
children. I've got statistics about children which blow my mind. 40% of single parent households are due to the result of a death. So we all have this, American culture ideology of a deadbeat dad or, single moms, or because the dad, maybe he's dead. It's probably a result of death. And then you think about the trauma that those children endure and the change in their brains and how that affects their trajectory and their capacity to learn and develop and grow. And then if you take and filter in poverty, race, geographical location, other disenfranchisements like LGBTQ, all of those layers of trauma and cultural conditioning change how you experience grief and what you have access points to. If you are, white and wealthy, grief might be easy for you because you can afford mental health services. A lot of people, therapies are out of pocket or they're on Medicaid and they can't afford grief counseling. And that is like a bare minimum access point.
Resources still aren't provided. Even if they can, we still are having to find it on our own. Even if we can afford it.
Yes. And that's how I came to be, was 3 a.m. Google searches, 27 pages deep, going, how do I, do an estate plan? How do I sell a house that doesn't belong to me? How do I navigate probate? How do I file taxes as a widow? How do I find a therapist? How do I find a funeral home? And how do you trust that funeral home when you're making that decision under duress, literal hours after this catastrophic event? Whether the death was anticipated or not, it's still catastrophic and trauma. And we're expected to make these decisions and have this information and know where to access it. It's like, oh, you're a widow now, and you just magically download all that information into your brain. No, we have to dig. And the people like you and I who saw that and went, that is awful, now make those access points. And that's my passion. I always say, if I could change one person's grief journey and make it easier or more bearable or healthier, then Craig's death wasn't in vain. He didn't have to die. It was, purely preventable. And then beyond that, the trauma that I experienced because of the lack of resources and access to information was also avoidable. So we, as grievers, have to share and amplify and shout from the rooftops that there's access, that there's help, that there's support, and we have to lift each other up, and we have to bend down and bring the people with us who aren't learning how to swim yet.
How do people find you? You have exciting things coming up.
I do. So people can go right to my website directly. It is www.ontuesdayswewearblack.com, or you can abbreviate that to otwwb.com. There you'll find a national vetted resource guide for how to find various things. You'll also find my free educational blog that I host with anecdotal and practical things there for you to read about. And then I am facilitating a death cafe. So that will be both virtual and in person here in Connecticut. A death cafe is a social franchise where we foster a death positive conversation in our communities to make the experience of learning about death and grief a little bit more palatable. So that will be happening the third Tuesday of every month, so January 23rd. So I'm really excited to partner with you and share in this journey and this endeavor. And people can reach out to me. I'm even, just to text or call or talk or email. You're not alone. For those of you who are listening, you're on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. There's thousands of people in between, I'm sure. You're not alone. And if you need, we are here. We see you. We hear you. We speak the same language as you. The two words I hate to say to people, I understand. Don't go it alone. Grief sucks. You don't have to do it alone.
And we will find the answer if we don't have it ourselves. If you are in between us and you want to work with someone like us, we'll find that person for you. I say it all the time, reach out. Even if it's not me that you want to work with, I will help you find whatever it is that you're looking for. So will Kate. If it's a male, if it's somebody older, whatever it is, we
have the resources and the capacity to, I always say, if I don't have the answer, I will go find it for you.
Yes.
And let us help you and let us build this supportive community together.
Anything I'm forgetting?
I'm sure there's something that we're both forgetting, #grief. I I would just say, like, stay tuned for those of you who are watching and listening. Like, I think Sam and I are going to start doing some really great things together. And I would love to continue to collaborate with you, Sam. And I'm excited to see how people take this and move it forward. But stay tuned for more exciting grief work.
Thank you so much for sticking with it with this technology, for making time, for everything you do. Get in touch with Kate on Tuesdays we wear black.com. And yes, definitely stay tuned. Until next time, always be ruthless.